A flight attendant ripped up a 12-year-old boy's ticket. A flight attendant ripped up a 12-year-old boy's ticket without asking a single question. What she didn't realize was his father owned the entire airline. Tarek Delancey clutched his boarding pass with sweaty palms. At 12, this was his first solo flight, and despite the airline policy allowing it and his father's confidence in him, he couldn't help feeling nervous. His backpack straps dug into his shoulders, laden with everything he needed: snacks, a sketch pad, headphones, and most importantly, a folded letter from his mom. "Sit by the window and look at the mountains," she'd written. "You'll feel like you're flying over a painting." He'd read that line repeatedly, finding comfort in her words as he prepared for his journey to Seattle for a 2-week robotics camp his father had helped sponsor. The pride on his mother's face when they dropped him off that morning was still fresh in his mind. Tarek had followed every protocol to the letter. He checked in early, obtained his gate information, and waited patiently in line like all the other passengers. The gate agent efficiently processed everyone ahead of him, but when his turn came, something changed in the atmosphere. The agent, Colleen Dresner, stood rigidly in her navy blazer, wearing red lipstick that clashed with her complexion, and an air of unwarranted authority. She barely glanced at him, completely ignoring his boarding pass. "Are you lost?" she asked condescendingly. "No," Tarek replied steadily. "I'm boarding Flight 262 to Seattle." She made no move toward her scanner, didn't check her monitor, merely tilted her head slightly. "Where are your parents?" "I'm flying alone," he explained, producing his printed confirmation. "My dad already boarded earlier." Colleen released one of those deliberately slow sighs that communicate disdain more effectively than words. "We don't just let kids wander up here on their own," she stated, crossing her arms defensively. "I'm not wandering," Tarek insisted, extending his ticket again. "It's right here." Instead of taking it properly, she pinched the paper between 2 fingers, barely examined it for 3 seconds, and then, without any warning, tore it cleanly in half. Tarek's mouth fell open in shock, but no sound emerged. He could only stare at the torn pieces in her hand. "There," she said flatly. "Now you'll wait here until we figure out who you really are. I've seen enough fake passes in my career to know when something doesn't look right." The terminal seemed to tilt momentarily. Passengers in line behind him exchanged confused glances, but remarkably, not one person spoke up or intervened. "I didn't do anything," Tarek murmured, his voice beginning to tremble. "You're being disruptive now," Colleen snapped. "Don't make this harder on yourself." Disruptive, that accusation echoed in his mind. He looked around desperately, waiting for someone, anyone, to intervene. Other passengers, staff members, even the security officer leaning casually against the wall. But it was as if he had become invisible, a problem everyone preferred to ignore. Colleen gestured to a younger male attendant with a headset. "Ryan, can you call TSA? We might have a situation." Fear began creeping through Tarek's body. He wasn't afraid of flying. He was afraid of this public humiliation, being singled out and diminished in front of strangers without having done anything wrong. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a dismissal of his very presence. His fingers found the letter from his mother in his jacket pocket. He didn't take it out. He simply held it like a talisman. The terminal continued its normal bustle, rolling suitcases, a crying baby near the charging station, a businessman typing on his laptop, all while Tarek stood frozen, still clutching the torn edges of his ticket, uncertain whether to sit or remain standing. He hadn't cried yet, but his eyes were beginning to burn with unshed tears. Ryan, the younger flight attendant, shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, clearly wanting to say something but hesitating. Meanwhile, Colleen maintained her crossed arm stance, acting as though She just prevented a major security breach rather than humiliating a child. Ma'am, Tarek tried again, if you just scan my name, my dad's already on the plane. His name is Benson Delancey. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, but she quickly suppressed it. I don't care whose name you throw around, she replied dismissively. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know when something's off. I didn't lie about anything. You're being combative now, she accused. You want to make this worse? He remained silent, not because he lacked a response, but because he refused to give her more ammunition. Finally, a TSA officer arrived, a stocky man in his 50s chewing gum and wearing mirrored sunglasses indoors. He glanced between Tarek and Colleen. What's the situation? Possible fake ticket, Colleen reported. Claims he's flying alone, no proper ID, attitude with staff. The officer raised an eyebrow at Tarek. You got a guardian here? My dad's on the plane already. Your name? Tarek Delancey. The officer pulled out a tablet and began typing. After a brief search, he looked back at Colleen. We've got a Delancey on the manifest. 2, actually. Benson Delancey checked in about 30 minutes ago, and the minor was confirmed for UM service. UM? Colleen asked, clearly confused. Unaccompanied minor, he clarified bluntly. The system's clean. He's legitimate. Colleen's jaw tightened visibly, but she remained silent, arms crossed, as if the facts themselves were personally offending her. The TSA officer turned to Tarek. You okay, kid? Tarek nodded. He wasn't really, but he wasn't about to admit that. Situation resolved, the officer concluded, stepping back. Looks like someone jumped the gun. But Colleen refused to back down. Well, he still shouldn't have approached the gate alone. There are procedures. No, Ryan finally interjected, his voice quiet but firm. He followed the rules. He even checked in with me at the front desk an hour ago. I verified his ID and everything. Colleen shot him a withering glance, but Ryan stood his ground. Something shifted in the atmosphere, not in the air, but in the way people were watching. A woman in her late 30s sitting nearby spoke up. I saw him standing there with his ticket. He didn't do anything wrong. Someone else murmured agreement. Yeah, this doesn't seem right. Tarek glanced around, still gripping his torn boarding pass. He didn't want vengeance or drama. He simply wanted acknowledgement that an injustice had occurred. Ryan tapped his earpiece. We need a supervisor at gate C12. Now. Colleen remained rigid and silent, her lips tightly pursed, clinging to whatever authority she believed she still possessed. Tarek stepped back, too exhausted to argue further, too shaken to speak. But the silence surrounding him had transformed from oppressive to expectant. Then, before anyone could address the situation further, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. Is there a reason my son isn't on that plane? Every head turned toward the voice. Benson Delancey wasn't physically imposing in the way many expect power to manifest, no broad shoulders or thunderous voice, but he didn't need those attributes. He walked with quiet confidence, shoulders relaxed, chin level, eyes steady and focused. His slate-gray jacket over a simple white button-down gave no indication of his wealth or position. Ryan's eyes widened instantly. Mr. Delancey, sir, I thought you'd already boarded. I stayed behind to observe, Benson explained. We've had staffing complaints on this route. I wanted to see for myself. His gaze fell on Tarek still holding the torn ticket. And it seems I saw more than I anticipated. Colleen shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't aware you weren't supposed to be, he interrupted, politely but firmly, establishing control of the conversation. Tarek moved toward his father, finally exhaling the breath he'd been holding since his pass was destroyed. Dad, are you all right? Benson asked. Tarek nodded slightly, his voice dry. She said I had a fake ticket, tore it up. Benson remained calm as he turned to Colleen. Did you scan his name? Well, no, I didn't get that far. Did you check the list? The tag on his backpack has a barcode linking to his manifest. I didn't think I needed to. You didn't think, Benson stated evenly. You assumed. Colleen's cheeks flushed, but she remained silent. Ryan stepped forward again, his voice stronger now. He was properly checked in. I verified his status myself. The system flagged no issues. Benson nodded once. Then why was his ticket destroyed? Colleen opened her mouth, then closed it without speaking. I'd like a supervisor immediately, Benson said, maintaining his composed tone. And I want this entire exchange reviewed on the security footage. That includes the moment my son was stopped, your conversation with him, and the exact time his boarding pass was torn. Ryan tapped his headset. Already on it, sir. The woman who had spoken earlier approached them. I witnessed everything, she confirmed. Your son was polite. He said he was flying alone and showed his pass. She didn't even look at it properly. Benson acknowledged her with a slight nod. Thank you. Colleen's posture deflated somewhat, though she remained standing. I didn't know who he was, she finally said, grasping for justification. That's precisely the problem, Benson replied. It shouldn't matter who he is. A heavy silence followed. A supervisor appeared shortly after, walking quickly toward them, his badge reflecting the overhead lights. Mr. Delancey, I apologize for the delay, he said, quickly assessing the situation. We just received notification of the issue. We need an official report, Benson stated, and I want assurance that my son boards without further interference. Of course. He's cleared to board. We'll issue a new ticket immediately. Tarek remained silent, staring at the torn paper in his hands. Benson gently touched his shoulder. You okay to fly? Tarek nodded, but whispered, I just don't understand why she looked at me that way. Benson considered before answering, looking at his son, then at Colleen. She saw what she wanted to see, not what was actually there. The supervisor cleared his throat. Mr. Delancey, would you prefer us to handle this internally or I'll file my own report, Benson decided. I'm not interested in creating drama. I'm interested in accountability. Those words hung in the air, direct but not vengeful. Yet even as procedures resumed and apologies were offered, something fundamental had shifted. This incident wouldn't end with a reprinted boarding pass. While the gate agent hurried to issue a new ticket, Tarek stood by the window, away from the crowd, watching the tarmac. Benson remained centrally positioned, surrounded by staff members who suddenly appeared extremely busy. But he wasn't allowing this moment to pass quietly. Colleen had retreated behind the desk, pretending to verify seating arrangements that required no verification. She knew all eyes were on her now. Benson approached her deliberately, not angrily, just purposefully. You didn't just tear up a boarding pass, he said calmly. You tore up a moment my son had been anticipating for weeks. Colleen's hand froze over the keyboard. She avoided eye contact. I made a judgment call. No, he countered. You made a judgment, period. She slowly turned toward him, her expression hardening. Are you suggesting something specific? I'm pointing out something that already occurred, Benson stated. You made a decision about my son the instant you saw him, before he spoke, before checking his name, before doing your job. She crossed her arms defensively again. I was protecting the flight's integrity. We're trained to identify inconsistencies. And what inconsistency did you identify? He questioned. A child standing in line with a valid ticket, quietly waiting his turn? Colleen clearly wanted to argue, but had no defense remaining. The security footage had been flagged, and the supervisor stood nearby, listening without interrupting. The most troubling aspect, Benson continued, is that you didn't hesitate at all, not until you realized who I was. And even then, you weren't remorseful. You were scrambling." Her face flushed again. She glanced toward the supervisor, possibly hoping for support, but he remained silent. "I spent years building this airline," Benson said softly. "Not because I needed to, but because I believe travel should be fair and inclusive, that everyone belongs in the sky, regardless of their name. Today, you showed me how much further we have to go." Colleen stared at the floor. Benson wasn't finished. "You assume no one would notice or care enough to speak up, and most days, you're probably correct." He gestured to the surrounding crowd, many already returning to their routines. Some continued watching. Others had returned to their devices as if nothing had happened. "That's the real danger, Colleen. Silence. Not just from you, but from everyone who witnesses something and chooses to ignore it." Her voice cracked slightly. "I didn't intend to—" "But you did," he interrupted. "You made my son feel like a threat, a problem requiring management. No customer service training can undo that damage." For a moment, Colleen seemed about to speak again, but then remained silent. Perhaps that was more appropriate. Sometimes silence is the only honest response. Benson stepped back, not to help her save face, but to allow her to fully absorb what had transpired. Ryan approached. "Mr. Delancey," he said quietly, "your son's new pass is ready. First-class upgrade, complimentary." "Thank you," Benson replied. "Not for the upgrade, for speaking up earlier. That required courage." Ryan nodded briefly and returned to the desk. Tarek rejoined his father, his eyes calmer now. "Do I have to sit in first class?" he asked. "I actually prefer the wing seats." Benson smiled slightly. "We can switch if you'd like." The supervisor cleared his throat. "Mr. Delancey, I want to personally apologize. This doesn't represent our values." "I hope not," Benson replied, "but I'll be monitoring the situation." The supervisor nodded seriously. "We'll address it properly." As they walked toward the jet bridge, what lingered most wasn't what had been said, but what hadn't. The silence from those who had witnessed but chosen comfort over courage. The jet bridge felt particularly narrow and stifling, with its characteristic blend of stale air and fluorescent lighting. But as Benson and Tarek walked together, it felt like entering a different kind of pressure zone, one with significant consequences awaiting. Inside the aircraft, the crew had already been briefed. A flight attendant in her late 40s, wearing the same Navy uniform as Colleen but with a warmer demeanor, greeted them immediately. "Mr. Delancey," she said, "we're deeply sorry about the gate incident. Your seats are prepared, and Tarek, if you'd like to see the cockpit before departure, we'd be happy to arrange that." Tarek blinked in surprise. "Really?" She smiled genuinely. "Absolutely. The captain admires your father's work." Benson placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "Go ahead. I'll be right here." As Tarek followed the attendant forward, Benson watched him with mixed emotions. Pride, certainly, but also a familiar ache. He had grown accustomed to witnessing such incidents, but they always struck a nerve when they affected his family directly. He settled into seat 2A and took out his phone, bypassing corporate emails to open a note application. He typed a message to his chief of staff. "Gate agent at Sacramento Terminal C-12, incident involving unaccompanied minor, security footage flagged. Request internal review and comprehensive retraining. I'll handle the report personally." He sent the message, then leaned back, gazing out the window as the jet bridge retracted. Back in the terminal, the aftermath was unfolding. Supervisor Dean Rosner stood near the desk with Ryan, who was officially off duty but lingering nearby. Colleen remained at her station, silent and still, staring at her screen as if it might somehow erase what had just occurred. Dean spoke quietly. "You understand the consequences, right?" She didn't look up. Disciplinary review at minimum. Her jaw tightened. I didn't mean— I understand your intentions, he interrupted, but intentions and actions are separate matters. You acted without justification. That's documented. You singled out a child, violated protocol, and now we're facing pressure from the highest level. This is serious, Colleen. She remained silent as the weight of the situation settled on her. Meanwhile, Ryan stood nearby, his arms crossed, not triumphant, just observant. You could have handled this differently, he noted. You had all the necessary information. The manifest was properly flagged. You simply didn't bother checking. Colleen finally snapped, her voice low but sharp. Don't pretend you've never overlooked something. I have, Ryan acknowledged. But I've never destroyed a child's ticket because he didn't match my expectations of a passenger, Dean intervened. That's enough. Human resources will manage the rest of this situation. Ryan exhaled deeply and departed without further comment. On the aircraft, Tarek returned from the cockpit, smiling slightly. Dad, they said I could press one of the buttons before takeoff. Benson raised an eyebrow. Did you ask what it does first? I'm not interested in accidentally deploying the cargo door at 30,000 feet. Tarek grinned. Benson laughed. Genuinely, for the first time that day. Shortly after, the flight attendants completed their safety demonstration, passengers fastened their seatbelts, and the cabin settled into pre-flight quiet. Tarek turned in his seat. Are you angry with her? Benson considered briefly. No. Why not? Because anger is simple, he explained. Ensuring this never happens again. That's the challenging part. That's where the real work lies. Tarek leaned back, silent again. She looked at me like I didn't belong. I know. I dislike that intensely. You're supposed to dislike it. He reached into his pocket and extracted his mother's note, now creased from his tight grip. Still planning to watch for the mountains? He asked quietly. Benson gazed out the window. You'll see them and much more. Just never let someone like her make you doubt whether you deserve your place. Tarek nodded. But even as the aircraft ascended, Benson knew their conversation wasn't concluded because the system that enabled this incident wasn't limited to the gate. It existed everywhere, and addressing it would require more than a single confrontation. As the plane leveled above the cloud layer, the city below appeared miniaturized, reduced to patches of light and shadow, as if the entire world could be compacted and stowed in an overhead compartment. Tarek leaned toward the window, pressing his forehead against the plexiglass. I think I see snow on the mountains. Benson looked over. Probably Mount Shasta. Looks like powdered sugar, Tarek observed. They both laughed softly. The tension from the gate incident hadn't disappeared entirely, but at this altitude, they could breathe more freely. The flight lasted just under 2 hours. Smooth air, the familiar rustle of newspapers, headphones being adjusted, passengers settling into their travel routines. At one point, a different attendant, Sharon, with her name embroidered on her uniform, approached with water and a folded note. This came from the gate supervisor before departure, she explained quietly. He requested I deliver it to you. Benson unfolded it. Mr. Delancey, we're initiating a review of all recent gate interactions across terminals, effective tomorrow. I recognize a formal apology is insufficient, but we are committed to improvement. Dean Rosner. He carefully refolded the note and placed it in his jacket pocket. From across the aisle, an older man, mid-60s with a silver buzz cut and worn denim jacket, leaned slightly toward them. Is that your son? He asked. Benson turned. Yes, he is. He handled himself remarkably well back there. Most kids would have lost composure. He's been taught to maintain control. The man nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at Tarek. My grandson's approximately his age. Kids like him, they need twice the patience, don't they? Benson paused before responding. Twice the patience, 3 times the caution, and still incidents occur. The man nodded knowingly, then returned to his original position. He remained silent for the duration of the flight. No further words were necessary. Tarek stretched and yawned. Will she lose her job? I'm not certain, Benson replied. Do you want that outcome? No, he answered. I want them to understand why this matters, why it has always mattered. People don't learn from being erased. They learn when forced to confront their blind spots. Tarek finally opened his sketch pad, beginning to draw mountains, clouds, and an aircraft cutting through the sky. Will she remember this? He wondered. I believe it will stay with her, Benson said. Good. They spoke little for the remainder of the flight, but the silence between them had lightened, holding something different, understanding, perhaps, or simply relief at having weathered the worst. Upon landing in Seattle, the cabin filled with familiar sounds, seatbelts releasing, overhead compartments opening, passengers stirring after hours of stillness. At the aircraft entrance, an airport staff member waited with a sign reading Unaccompanied Minor, Tarek Delancey Protocol. As they exited, Benson placed his hand on his son's shoulder. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Will you fly out to meet me? Absolutely. Tarek smiled and collected his bag. Sharon smiled at them both. Enjoy your camp experience, young man. Thank you, Tarek replied, then looked at Benson. Love you. Love you too. Watching his son disappear into the terminal with his escort, Benson felt the day's weight settle on his chest, not crushingly, but as a reminder of why he had established this airline. Because for some, flying is merely transportation, while for others, it's a battlefield where politeness doesn't guarantee protection, where silence allows problems to fester, and where even the skies aren't neutral territory. But what Benson understood, what he had taught Tarek to believe, was that doing the right thing remains right, regardless of its inconvenience. 2 days after the flight, Benson sat in his office on the 22nd floor of an Oakland high-rise. The windows provided a panoramic view of the bay, the bridge extending into the distance, fog curling around the skyline. But Benson wasn't admiring the view. He was rereading an email from Dean Rosner. Mr. Delancey, Colleen Dresner has been placed on administrative leave pending complete review. Following your recommendation, we're implementing a system-wide training initiative focusing on bias recognition, conflict de-escalation, and youth passenger protocols. I appreciate your measured approach and your reminder that true accountability transcends punishment. Sincerely, Dean. He closed the message and reclined in his chair. He felt no particular satisfaction, no vindication in being correct, only a quiet steadiness from knowing that something had changed. Not everything, but something meaningful. His assistant knocked before entering. Your 2:30 legal team meeting is confirmed, and there's a message from the Sacramento Gate representative. A woman named Colleen Dresner has requested a meeting with you. He sighed. Schedule it for next week. 10 minutes maximum. Will do. After she left, Benson reached into his pocket and retrieved the remains of Tarek's boarding pass. He had preserved the torn halves not from vindictiveness, but as a tangible reminder, seemingly insubstantial, yet profoundly significant. That evening, Tarek called from camp. We built drones today, he reported excitedly. Mine flew directly into a tree. Benson laughed. At least it achieved liftoff. Definitely. I'll send a photo once we retrieve it from the branches. How are things otherwise? Tarek hesitated. Good. But something interesting happened. Another kid from Texas asked what I want to be when I grow up. I said I wasn't sure. He told me, you look like someone who's going to be in charge someday. Benson smiled. His assessment isn't wrong. I didn't feel that way at the airport. I know, Benson said gently. But someday, perhaps someone will see you and instead of making assumptions, they'll remember your name. Not because of my position, but because of who you are. After a pause, Tarek added, I drew her, by the way. Who? The gate agent. I drew her face, not unkindly, just realistically. I placed her behind a desk with the words, do better, on the glass panel. Benson absorbed that. That sounds like a meaningful drawing. Yes, I think I'll keep it. They exchanged goodnights and ended the call. Benson sat quietly in his darkened office. What had occurred at that gate wasn't unusual. That was what most people failed to understand. It wasn't shocking. It was systematic. But systems can change. Not through outrage, but through deliberate action. Through identifying problems when it would be easier to ignore them. Through raising children who maintain their dignity when faced with injustice. Not everyone has the advantage of a parent with influence ready to intervene, which is precisely why silence cannot be an option, not in airports, schools, or anywhere else. So if this story resonates with you, if you've witnessed similar situations, if you've been in Tarek's position, or if you've remained silent when you should have spoken, know that you're not alone. The lesson is clear. Silence doesn't protect, it enables. And when people finally speak up, truly speak up, systems begin to transform. Share this story not for attention, but for awareness, for accountability, and for every child simply trying to reach their destination without being treated as a problem. Remember that respect should never depend on recognition. And the next time you observe something unjust, don't look away, speak up.